Hello students, welcome to the second part of our discussion video. This video is the continuation of our discussion about the trade and other receivables. This is the video where we are going to discuss the specifics of accounts receivables. These are our unit learning outcomes. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the necessary adjustments in determining the net realizable value of accounts receivable. Second, record sale transactions under gross method and net method. Third, differentiate accounting for doubtful accounts under allowance method and direct write-off method. So we have here accounts receivable. So as we know in the previous video that accounts receivable initially shall be measured at face amount or original invoice amount, since this is what is considered as their fair value plus transaction cost. Whereas after the initial measurement, so we have here the subsequent measurement of accounts receivable. Generally, receivable shall be measured at amortized cost, but for accounts receivable, since the term amortized cost is not very applicable to accounts receivable, that is why the most appropriate term for the subsequent measurement of accounts receivable is your net realizable value. When we say net realizable value, this is the amount of cash expected to be collected or the estimated recoverable amount. Accordingly, in estimating the net realizable value of trade accounts receivable, the following deductions are made. So we have 4 deductions that we can apply to our accounts receivable for us to be able to get the net realizable value. So first, we have allowance for freight charge. Second, we have allowance for sales return, allowance for sales discount, and then allowance for doubtful accounts or bad debts. So let us discuss first the allowance for freight charge. So before we go to accounting the freight charge, let us first discuss or review the terms related to freight charge. So I know that this topic has already been discussed in your basic accounting, so I hope you can still recall. Do not forget the relevance of these shipping terms, because this will help you analyze kung sino yung dapat magbayad or sino dapat ang mag-shoulder ng freight charges, tsaka sino yung actual na nagbayad. So these terms here, FOB shipping point and FOB destination, will answer the question, who should pay the freight charge? So normally, who should pay the freight charge? Of course, that should be shouldered by the rightful owner. So that is why here in your FOB shipping point, let us establish kung sino ba ang nagmamay-ari ng goods while they are still in transit and hindi pa nakarating sa destination. Accordingly, pag sinabi nating FOB shipping point, it means that the ownership of the goods purchased is transferred to the buyer upon loading to carrier. So, ibig sabihin, while the goods are in transit, pagmamay-ari na iyon ng buyer. So that ang dapat magbayad ng transportation cost or freight charge should be the buyer. Next is your FOB destination. So this time naman, this means that the ownership of the goods purchased is transferred to the buyer only when the goods are received by the buyer, or in short, when the goods when the goods reach its destination. So, pag nandoon na kay buyer, then doon pa lang magta-transfer ang ownership ng goods. So, ibig sabihin, while the goods are still in transit, the goods are still owned by the seller. So, si seller pa dapat ang mag-shoulder ng transportation cost since siya naman ang nagmamay-ari ng goods in transit. Another thing also that you have to remember is that if it's FOB shipping point, the freight cost or the freight charge shall be shouldered by the buyer. And take note that the buyer will recognize it as a freight in, which is an adjunct account. No? Adjunct account. So, ibig sabihin nun, that account shall be added to your purchases, no, para makuha natin yung total purchases natin. Whereas, pag FOB destination naman, ang seller ang obliged or ang responsable or ang obligadong magbayad ng transportation cost. So, si seller ang merong obligasyon na magbabayad or na magbayad ng transportation cost or freight charge because the seller still owns the goods while they are still in transit. So, kapag hindi pa na karating doon sa destination kay buyer, so the goods are still owned by the seller. So, therefore, sila dapat din yung magbayad ng transportation cost. In the part of the seller, transportation cost na sinolder nila shall be charged to freight out, which is an expense account. No? It's an operating expense na account. So, yan, no? So, yung FOB shipping point mo, buyer dapat ang magbayad. FOB destination, seller dapat ang magbayad. Now, these two terms here naman, freight collect and freight prepaid, will answer the question, who actually paid for the transportation cost? So, ibig sabihin, sino ang nagbayad? Sino yung actual na nagbayad, no, ng transportation cost? Pag sinabi nating freight collect, it means that the buyer pays the freight charges. So, siya yung actual na nagbayad. Pag sinabi nating freight prepaid, it means that the seller pays the freight charges, of course, before niya pinalarga yung goods. Now, there are times na yung dapat nagbayad ay hindi siya ang nagbayad na actual ng goods. Say, isa-isahin natin na kasi ang terms could be, for example, FOB shipping point siya, tapos freight collect, so wala tayong magiging problema. Ang magbabayad, no, or ang dapat magbayad ay ang buyer. So, ang nagbayad talaga ang buyer din kasi freight collect man. Now, what if FOB shipping point tapos freight prepaid? So, ano ibig sabihin nun? So, ibig sabihin, dapat ang nagbayad ng shipping cost is the buyer pero binayaran na ahead ni seller. So, what will happen is that the seller will just add the transportation cost or the freight charge to the payable of or to the receivable of the seller, no, from the buyer. Another is, what if FOB destination tapos freight prepaid? So, wala tayong magiging problema doon kasi ang dapat na nagbayad ay ang seller. So, ang actual na nagbayad, kasi freight prepaid yan, ang seller din. So, wala tayo magiging problema. So, the seller will just recognize the transportation cost as freight out. Now, yung sa fourth scenario we're in, what if FOB destination tapos freight collect? So, it means that ang seller dapat ang magbayad, pero ang nagbayad ng actual ay ang buyer. So, ibig sabihin, merong liability na si seller kay buyer since si buyer ang nagbayad ng transportation cost. So, supposedly, si seller sana kasi nga FOB destination. Now, if the terms or the shipping term is FOB destination tapos freight collect, so si seller dapat ang nagbayad ng goods or ng freight charges. Kaso lang, ang actual na nagbayad is ang buyer. So, what the seller would do is recognize niya yung freight out, tapos gagamit siya ng allowance for freight charge na account. So, allowance ang ating gagamitin kasi hindi pa naman talaga actual na nagbayad si seller. No? Pero the seller already is anticipating na meron siyang obligasyon in this particular amount, which is equivalent, of course, to the freight charge paid by the buyer. So, we have here an example for accounting for freight charge. So, an entity has 100,000 accounts receivable at the end of the accounting period. Then the terms are 210 and 30. FOB destination freight collect. The customer paid the freight charge for 5,000. So, please take note of the entry na ginawa ni seller. So, first to record the sales. So, you just debit accounts receivable, 100,000. Freight out, which is an expense account, you have 5,000. Then you have to credit sales at 100,000. And then we recognize allowance for freight charge at 5,000. So the second entry is to record the collection within the discount period. So yung entry natin dyan, of course, tanggalin na natin yung sales discount, which is 2%. Since we are assuming that nakabayad siya within 10 days from the invoice date. So, you have here, you debit cash at 93,000 na lang. That is 100,000 times 98% minus 5,000 for the allowance for freight charge. Kasi 'di ba ang nagbayad is ang buyer, na supposedly si seller ang mag-shoulder. So, i-deduct na lang ang kokolektahin natin from the buyer will only be net amount na of the charges kasi nga siya yun nagbayad. So, we also debit sales discount at 2,000 and you debit allowance for freight charge for 5,000 and credit accounts receivable for 100,000. So, again, this happens because look at the problem, An entity has 100,000 accounts receivable at the end of the accounting period. Tapos, the terms are 210 and 30 FOB destination freight collect. So, since ang customer nagbayad ng freight charge, then we really have to recognize allowance for freight charge, especially that it's already month end. So, you have to take up in the books na meron tayong anticipated na allowance for freight charge. So, meaning, meron kayo na-anticipate na nababayaran mo na freight charge. So, that is why ini-include natin yan dito. So, next in the list is yung allowance for sales returns. So, the measurement of accounts receivable shall also recognize the probability that some goods will be returned by customer due that are unsatisfactory as to quality and will require reduction in the amount they owe. So, we have here an example, an amount of 50,000 of the total accounts receivable at year-end represents selling of goods that probably be returned. So, the journal entry to recognize the allowance for sales return will be a debit of sales returns, 50,000, and a credit to allowance for sales returns. So, do not be confused as to the learnings that you had in Basic Accounting or ACC 111 because transactions there already consummated. So, for example, pag sinabi niya doon na merong sales return, so, nangyari na talaga naka-sales return na siya. Whereas, dito naman, it is still being anticipated. So, hindi pa nangyari, nag-provide ka lang advance for the possibility na merong mga customers mo from the sales mo this period na magsasauli ng goods in the next accounting period. So this is an application of the strict matching principle na dapat yung expense na related to a certain income is ma-report sila in the same period. So that's why we are anticipating for those mga returns. So that is allowance for sales returns. Punta naman tayo dito sa allowance for sales discounts. So if you can still recall, diba itong cash discount, ino-offer ng entities for them to collect cash from credit customers as soon as possible. So para mas mapabilis yung pagbayad ng mga customers. So para ma-encourage sila na magbayad in an earlier possible na time. So yung cash discount in the point of view of the buyer, ang tawag doon ay purchase discount. Pag support naman ng seller, ang tawag naman doon ay sales discount. So again, dito class, no, this is only an anticipation of what will happen in the next accounting period. Kasi we are trying to match the revenue, no, sa kanyang related na mga expenses, or yung expense pina-match natin doon sa related na revenue. So since ngayong period ka magre-report ng income or ng sales, so dapat lang na ang related expenses nila ma-report mo din ngayon, or yung mga amounts, no, na deducted or to be deducted, no, sa revenue na to, dapat ma-report na rin in this period. So we have an example here of how cash discount is being expressed. So pwede siyang 2, 10, and 30. So this means that the credit period of the sale is 30 days. So the buyer should pay the obligation within that period. If paid within 10 days, the buyer can avail a 2% discount. So that's how the discount term is being expressed. 2, 10, and 30. No, so yung 2 dito represents the discount. Then 10 here represents the discount period. So ito na net of 30 days. So this is the longest time, no? Or shall we call it credit period of the sale. Now let us go to the methods of recording credit sales. Now, so we have 2 methods of recording credit sales. So one is the gross method, the other one is the net method. So ano yung kaibahan ng dalawa? So based sa pangalan pa lang, pag gross method class, you do not deduct yet, no, the discount. So you're going to recognize your sales at gross amount. Tapos pag net method naman, so i-deduct na natin yung possible discount. So deducted na siya, yung possible discount. So we have here an example, no? We have a sale of merchandise for 100,000, the terms 5, 10, and 30. So this is your transaction. So under gross method, diba, our entry is your debit accounts receivable and your credit sales. So take note of the amount. So we are using here, we are recording 100,000, which is the gross amount. But under the net method, the same accounts lang. So debit accounts receivable, credit sales, but take note of the amount. So we already deducted the 5% na discount. So 100,000 times 5%, that's 5,000. So ni-net out na natin doon sa 100,000. Now, we assume that the collection, no, happened within the discount period. So kung gross method ang gamit natin, you just debit cash at 95,000 kasi yan lang yun na receive natin since naka-discount siya. Then you debit sales discount at 5,000 and you credit accounts receivable for 100,000. Now, kapag net method naman, so diretso na, no? Kasi yung accounts receivable lang naman na ni-recognize mo ay 95,000 lang naman. So, when you collected it, so you just debit cash at 95,000 and credit accounts receivable at 95,000. Now, if the collection is beyond the discount period, so in short, hindi na naka-avail ng discount. So, under the gross method, you simply debit cash for 100,000 kasi 100,000 naman yung ating na-receive, no, na amount galing sa customer. And then we'll just credit accounts receivable. But under the net method class, so you debit cash 100,000, you're going to credit sales discount forfeited at 5,000, and you credit accounts receivable at 95,000. Kasi yan lang naman yung amount na dinebit mo before. So, take note, sales discount forfeited is considered in other income na account. So, this is what I was saying kanina related sa allowance, no, for sales discount. So, if customers are granted cash discounts and the discount period is still open at the end of the reporting period, an allowance for sales discount shall be established if it is probable that such customers will avail the discount based on the past experience. So, we have here an example. The accounts receivable amounting to 100,000 at the end of the period is reliably estimated, no, that discounts will be taken in the amount of 5,000. So the adjustment to the record for the expected sales discount is a debit to sales discount and credit allowance for sales discount. So, hindi pa nga naka-avail kasi wala pang nagbayad sa'yo. But since you're anticipating that the payment will be made next accounting period and that you are reasonably certain or you can reliably estimate na based on your past experience na nag-a-avail naman talaga yung mga customers na or nagtitake na naman talaga sila ng discount. So, if that's the case, then you have to anticipate for that and recognize for your allowance for sales discount. So, the last one is itong allowance for doubtful accounts. So, the same also, I know you are familiar with the allowance for doubtful accounts. So, the purpose why we are recognizing allowance for doubtful accounts is to recognize, no, the bad debts or yung mga doubtful accounts and anticipate for accounts that should become uncollectible. So, hindi pa nga talaga lumayas yung customer natin, but we are already anticipating, no, based on the experience na meron talagang mga tao na hindi nagbabayad ng utang. So, that's why we have to recognize allowance for doubtful accounts. There are two methods for accounting or in accounting for bad debts or doubtful accounts. One is yung allowance method, the other one is yung direct write-off method. So, ano bang kaibahan ng dalawa, no? So, sa allowance method class, no, it requires recognition of a bad debt loss if the accounts are still doubtful of collection. So, even if doubtful of collection pa lang, hindi mo pa talaga sure na hindi magbabayad yung customer o yung mga clients mo, you're anticipating already for bad debts. So, advance mag-isip ang allowance method. And ito rin yung ginamit natin doon sa basic accounting. The other one is direct write-off method. So, in this method, it requires recognition of bad debt loss only when the accounts, no, prove to be worthless or uncollectible. So, wala kang i-report or wala kang tatanggaling accounts receivable unless you have proven already that this amount or this account is already worthless. Hindi na talaga siya makokolekta. So, that's under direct write-off. So, under sa direct write-off method, wala kang i-maintain na allowance for doubtful accounts na account. So, wala kang allowance for doubtful accounts. So, this is a comparison of the allowance method and the direct write-off method in these three usual transactions pertaining to bad debts. So, first transaction here, when accounts are doubtful of collection. So, under the allowance method, this is the time when we have to recognize our doubtful accounts expense and credit allowance for doubtful accounts. Whereas, under the direct write-off method, wala tayong journal entry dyan. Kasi, direct write-off nga tayo, no? So, pag mga doubtful of collection pala, hindi ka pa sure, then wala tayong i-report na expense. The second case is when doubtful accounts are proven to be worthless or uncollectible. So, under allowance method, you are going to debit allowance for doubtful accounts and you credit accounts receivable. So, kung titingnan natin, class, dito sa allowance method, di ba walang expense account na affected? No? Bakit? Kasi, di ba you are just debiting allowance for doubtful accounts and credit ka ng accounts receivable. So, wala talaga involved na income account. So, tapos mo nang na-report or tapos mo nang na-recognize ang expense account noong ikaw ay nag-set up ng allowance for doubtful accounts. So, ngayon, kung ikaw ay magra-write off na, kasi nga, worthless na yung account, hindi mo talaga makolekta na, then, we are going to charge it na to allowance for doubtful accounts. So, that's for the allowance method. For the direct write-off method naman, when the doubtful accounts are proven to be worthless, that is the time when you are going to recognize your doubtful accounts expense. So, dyan ka palang magre-report ng doubtful accounts expense and tas i-credit mo agad sa iyong accounts receivable. So, that's direct write-off method. So, again, observe, that kapag direct write-off method, meron tayong affected na expense account. So, what is the effect of this in your income statement? So, of course, liliit yung net income mo because na-affected yung net income mo, liliit siya because you have this additional expense to be recognized. So, last transaction, we have recovery of accounts previously written off. So, ito siya, applicable to siya, class, kapag previously na write off mo kasi nga worthless na. Tapos, you're able to collect it from your customer. So, you are able to recover accounts which are already written off in the past. So, kapag merong ganito recovery, take note also of the entries. So, we have to establish first the receivable. So, you debit accounts receivable and you credit allowance for doubtful accounts. So, parang reverse lang natin yung ating pag-write off. So, aside from that entry, meron pa tayong isa pang entry. So, pag na-re-establish na, so we can prepare na the entry para sa collection. So, you simply debit cash, credit, accounts, receivable. So, this one is regardless kung kailan nangyari yung recovery. Kung ang recovery ba ay pagka-succeeding year pa, tapos ngayon ka nag-report ng pag-write off ng accounts receivable, then this particular entries here would still be the same under the allowance method. Now, kapag ikaw naman ay direct write-off method ang ginamit, tapos mayroong recovery class, so depende ang entry mo kung kailan nangyari ang recovery. So, when the recovery is of the same year with the write-off, then this will be your entry. So, yan. You just recognize your accounts receivable, set up natin, tapos mag-credit ka ng bad debts. So, parang, kung hindi ko ito i-credit ng bad debts, isa-slash ko na lang, doubtful accounts expense. So, in short, para kang ni-reverse mo lang din yung entry mo dito sa pag-write off. And then, pwede ka nang recognize ng collection. So, debit, cash, credit accounts, receivable. Now, when the recovery naman is sa subsequent year pa. No? So, kung ganun ang nangyari na ngayon, for example, last year mo siya ni-write off. Tapos, this year, na-recover mo, na-collecta mo sa iyong customer. So, what will happen there is that you are going to just debit it to cash and credit it to miscellaneous income. So, mangyayari, magkakaroon ng income, no? Yung or other income ang entity. So, that is for the bad debts, na accounting for bad debts. Let's have an illustration. So, you have here, no, some sample illustrations lang to account for bad debts. So, sample, the statement is accounts of 30,000 are considered doubtful of collection. So, there is still doubtful pa lang, hindi pa sure. But then, under the allowance method, you're already anticipating. So, tag-record ka na debit doubtful accounts expense, credit, allowance for doubtful accounts na 30,000. Pag direct write-off, of course, wala tayong entry. Second, when the accounts are subsequently proven to be worthless or uncollectible, so yun, nag-write off na tayo. So, we debit it to allowance for doubtful accounts and credit accounts receivable. Next would be the recovery. So, debit accounts receivable, credit allowance for doubtful accounts for 30,000. Tapos, record natin yung collection. Debit cash and then credit AR for 30,000. Now, under the direct write-off method, so yun, no, ito siya. This is the time na mag-recognize tayo ng expense, na unlike doon sa allowance method. So, sa entry, same lang man tayo ng entry dito. Kaso nga lang, hindi ka mag-report ng allowance kasi wala namang allowance dito sa direct write-off. So, what you're going to credit will be your expense. No? So, ito, bad debts ito or doubtful accounts expense na para ma-uniform sila. So, aside from that entry, we'll also have yung sa collection na. So, you debit cash and your credit accounts receivable for 30,000. So, now, you might wonder, how are we going to present doubtful accounts expense na in your income statement? So, saan ko ba siya ilalagay? Doon ba siya sa marketing expense or doon ba siya sa admin expense? So, take note, class, no, that the presentation of doubtful accounts into your income statement, whether they are distribution cost or administrative expense, will depend on who grants, no, the credit and collection ng mga applications. So, sino ba ang nagbibigay ng credit and collection? So, kinsa may in charge, no, sa pag-approve sa mga credit sales. So, if the granting of credit and collection are under the charge of the sales manager, then therefore that doubtful accounts expense should be charged, no, or to be presented under distribution cost or tawag natin marketing cost na, so or selling and selling expenses na, so dun siya ma-charge. Now, if naman ang nagbibigay ng authority or nag-approve, no, ng mga accounts natin ay under the charge of an officer other than the sales manager, so in short, iba na yung in charge dito sa ating pag-grant ng credit, say credit line na sa isang customer. So, pag hindi ang sales manager, so malamang yung doubtful accounts expense shall be presented under the administrative expense. So, dyan siya mabibelong. Okay, so that will be the end of the presentation. So I hope you learned something from this presentation. By the way, I still have another video no for you to be related naman to the estimation of your doubtful accounts expense. So that is still na continuation of our topic in this video. So I'll see you in our online class, and thank you class for your patience in watching this video. Bye.